Good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm going to remove this because I think you can all hear me, and this is really not working for me. So welcome to those of you who are new, who I haven't met. It's great to have you with us. And as you can see, our worldwide connection is wonderful. See the folks on the screen from all points of the compass, and yet exasperating. To make this new way of expounding the Dharma and sharing it work is quite a feat. So your patience and understanding are appreciated. My name is Bokushu, and I'm one of the teachers here at the Village Zendo. And recently I was reading online and I saw a headline that caught my eye, and I'd like to share the headline with you. And it read, "Decades of intensive studies have revealed that chimpanzees and other species can pretend, but they might not be able to fully tell reality from fantasy." And I read that and I kind of thought, well, I guess whoever wrote this wrote it without irony and didn't perhaps stop to think about whether they themselves could fully tell reality from fantasy. So I ask all of us here, can we fully tell reality from fantasy? How can we tell which is which? Are we just slightly advanced chimpanzees? Or perhaps they're more advanced than us. Perhaps they don't separate from either their fantasies or their realities. And it's all just reality for them, simply by virtue of them not separating from what's right in front of them. But all of that is just speculation. Of course, we're here to learn as human beings how exactly we can go about exploring our humanity together with our mutual support, both on screen and off. So here's a few things that came to my mind as I was wondering, well, how can I tell fantasy from reality? And I think the process that we go through as human beings is that we often notice a gap between whatever we might call reality and what we want. And in this model, what we want, not being real, would be, by definition, I think, a fantasy. So one clue about the distinction between the two might be to look at the gap between what we have and what we want, or between what we have and what we don't want. So that's step one, is notice the gap. Step two, it could be like a cloud, okay? Electrons darting around. So I'm putting it in numerical order, but I don't think it's necessarily right to think of it that way. So I just want to critique my own schema, my fantasy for how to organize the difference between fantasy and reality is itself a fantasy. The next thing that might occur is that we might notice a pattern in what triggers this gap. So, okay, there's a gap. What are the circumstances? Who are the people? What's the situation that most likely will trigger this gap between reality and our desires? And then we might notice, or with that, we might notice the amplitude of that gap. How big is the gap? What is its quality? How does it feel to be denied what we want? It's a feeling that's familiar, right? I think we've all had that feeling quite a few times. Maybe you're even having it right now. Who is this guy anyway? Talking about this stuff. It's okay if you're having it right now. Believe me, a certain part of me is having it right now. But so there's perceiving the gap, there's the amplitude of the gap, the quality of the gap, and the pattern of all these things that we can notice. So we can actually find our fantasies to be quite useful as a way of getting in touch with reality. Because as we study the gap, its quality, its amplitude, what triggers it, we might learn something about how not to enact the patterns that go with the gap. The gap and the patterns are not they're not welded together. They can, in fact, fall apart. They're waiting, in fact, to fall apart. They're waiting for us to notice our own patterns and to get tired of them and to let them go by virtue of the energy that it takes to hold them together. It is a lot of energy, isn't it, to pursue our fantasies in the face of reality. Reality is much, much stronger than we are. So our desires are, I think, rather exhausting. I think we get tired of it the more we look at it. And so I was thinking as I was coming here that this practice is really sort of the antidote to an addiction we have in our opposition to reality. This is a way to end our addiction to our own fantasies. So, leaving all that aside, when we see this gap between our fantasies and reality, we advanced chimpanzees, we have three choices. We can try to control whatever it is that we think is responsible for the gap, although we, in fact, ourselves are responsible. And we should remember that we are responsible and own that we are, in fact, creating that gap. We can nonetheless, in our delusion, try to control whatever we would like to blame for that gap. Whoever it is that's saying the thing that pisses us off. Or in my case, as I'll get to in a minute, the construction project that will never end next to my apartment. Or whatever your version of it is, it's very tempting to point at that thing, that person, that situation, and say that that is the cause. So we can try to control that. I've done a lot of that. A lot of trying to control. And if that doesn't work, or in lieu of that, we could run away from it. Okay, we could escape from the situation, the person, whatever it is that's causing the pain of that gap. And I've done a lot of that too, as I will presently discuss. And the third, and really in my case, and perhaps yours, dead last, is accommodating whatever it is, living with it, learning to live with whatever it is that we would like to blame for creating that gap. That is, of course, the most challenging. And in fact, that is the fruit of practice, is that we can use that option more and more freely than the first two of control or flight. So in my case, as I said just a moment ago, I've got this building going up outside my apartment, 10 feet outside, a large building. And I've had an incredible relationship with this project and the 10-foot gap between me and this project. And I did try in a very peripheral way to control it, although how can you control building in New York City? I mean, builders run the city, right? The developers own New York City. So there's no good trying to control them. And then I did a lot of running. Did a lot of running to a lot of different places. Where should I live? What should I do? How can I fix this for myself? How can I make my life the way I want it to be. I expended so much energy to try to do that. And I really have to pause and just mention how painful it is. It's not just energy intensive, it's painful. And the virtue of the pain and the virtue of the exhaustion is they bring you to a different place. They instill a different relationship with you if you listen to the pain and exhaustion of your own problems. They create and point the way to a different mode of engagement with the world. So we really just have to listen. And it takes a lot, but eventually I listened and something has changed. So this model of running, I've started to actually understand that when I'm running away from something, I'm also moving toward something. And that's, of course, very obvious as I say it to you. But if you're in a mode of running, I think many of us are doing it the way a cat would do it, sort of like, I think they kind of run sideways almost, and they've got their head looking back at whatever it is, making sure that whatever it is behind them can't get them. So like, I guess if it gets close enough, they'll turn and attack, but they kind of keep their head pointed back at what they're leaving. And I was like that, looking back at the thing I didn't want and not really noticing that as I was moving away from something, I was also moving toward something. And when I realized that I was moving towards something, I felt profoundly different about what I was engaged with in this process of fleeing what I didn't want. And I still don't know what I'm moving toward, but I know I'm moving towards something. And I'm very curious and interested in what that might be. If it will just reveal itself to me, I'm really interested to see. It's like a movie, a cliffhanger. And I don't know where the ending will be, if there will be an ending. Will there be a plot that I can define to this movie of my fleeing and yet moving toward? But I'm much more interested in the moving toward. And it's been a bit of a revelation just to allow myself to ponder that without knowing. And I realized as I pondered it that it's much harder, for me at least, to move towards something than to run away from something. Running away is simple. I was reading an article in the Washington Post about bees, what you're supposed to do if bees go after you. And basically the article said, just run straight and as fast as you can. Don't get in water. Apparently they just hover and wait for you to come up for air. So don't go in water. Just run like hell in one straight line as fast as possible. And that is simple. If you can keep your head on while you're doing it, it's not hard. But approaching something is very different. What am I approaching? Do I even see it? And if I see it, what's the proper approach? What's the goal, really? I'm meeting this unknown thing, this future, this alternative. And how do I have a friendly relationship with it? When we go to the altar here in the Zendo, we don't go straight on directly toward it, ever, actually, except in one or two very rare circumstances. We are always going to the side. So I kind of think about this project of moving toward the way one might think about moving toward an altar. Nothing holy about it. It's just that you don't want to overwhelm and snuff out the energy of whatever it is that's out there waiting to welcome us. It's just another manifestation actually of ourselves, but we can't see it. We're both participating in the creation of it and moving toward it. I think it's a very alive place to be. I find it very frightening, actually, compared to the running, which is so simple. Such a simple program to execute. A costly, simple program. High energy, low return. Not a good investment. So, a few more thoughts about this in this more systematic way. And I was thinking about looking backward as an expression of fear, and I did talk about that when I was talking about the cat, the way the cat runs. And that looking forward is perhaps in this model akin to hope. Fear is akin to reacting, while hope might be about expecting, might be. But expecting has a way of creating its own reactions, because if we expect something and we don't get it, then we do have a reaction, don't we? When we don't get what we expect through our hope for something, we will react to that. We'll react to it with disappointment. So I think that actually both hope and fear are problems, at least for me. You may love hope. You may have pillows with hope embroidered on the pillows. It's fine. If I had such a pillow, I'd probably give it to the nearest housing works. But if you have that as a motto, great. So finally, I thought that fear is avoiding and hope is wanting, and really have a phrase in one of our sutras, touching and turning are both wrong. Touching and turning away are both wrong, for it is like a massive fire. So if we think of the thing that we're approaching like that, I think that's an interesting visual for, well, how do I engage with this? No easy answers. I guess what I'm asking is, how do we navigate the pain of our lives? Without fear and without hope, can we navigate that pain, whatever that is for us? Noise, oppressive people, oppressive thoughts, oppressive self-image when there's no self, job pressures, dirty subway, fighting in the subway, someone dying in the subway. There's been a lot of news about that recently in New York City. The pain of life is there for all to see. How do we not turn away from it? How do we not touch it? How do we realize ourselves in the midst of it? It's a lot more interesting than running away from it. I'm somebody who likes quotes. So I have a few quotes on the topic of hope and fear, which I'd like to share with you. And a couple of them, I might not read the second, or I'll read the second and not the first. Samuel Johnson's one of my favorites. And he wrote this about hope. Hope is itself a species of happiness, and perhaps the chief happiness which this world affords. But, like all other pleasures immoderately enjoyed, the excesses of hope must be expiated by pain, and expectations improperly indulged must end in disappointment. If it be asked, what is the improper expectation which it is dangerous to indulge, experience will quickly answer that it is such expectation as is dictated not by reason, but by desire. Expectation is raised not by the common occurrences of life, but by the wants of the expectant. an expectation that requires the common course of things to be changed and the general rules of action to be broken. So Johnson here is, I think, calling on us to remain grounded in reality and to not substitute our fantasies for it. Saying what I said in much more elegant language, actually. Then we have a very different mode of expression from Pier Paolo Pasolini, the Italian director. Hope, I have none, and furthermore, I condemn it with everything in my power. Hope is the flag, the special marker of hypocrisy. I don't believe in it. I only believe in my own vitality. Well, you might like hope, so I don't mean to rain on your parade with that quote, but I really think there's something in this. I only believe in my own vitality. We have the power to allow ourselves to change. And this practice, which you're here enacting, is the perfect vehicle for allowing change in ourselves and in our circumstances and not resisting it. So I think he's on to something, good old Pasolini. And I'll conclude with one more about hope, I think. Let's see, I had one about fear, but it's kind of boring. It's from Krishnamurti, very preachy. I'd rather read you this one from Yukio Mishima's Temple of the Golden Pavilion, stripping with a bit of acid, so I hope it won't bother you too much. The policeman and I followed Mother in silence. Mother was so excited that she had even forgotten to address a conventional word of greeting to the policeman. She walked along with quick, short steps. As I gazed at her soft sash, which hung down in the back, I wondered what it was that made Mother so particularly ugly. Then I understood. What made her ugly was hope. Incurable hope, like an obstinate case of scabies, which lodges damp and reddish in the infected skin, producing a constant itching and refusing to yield to any outer force. And although that's a very scornful expression, I think the ending is very important. If we refuse to yield to outer forces, we will be condemned to live with our own unhappiness, our own suffering. Outer forces are our gift, our teaching. They're here to point the way, and our practice is giving us the means to go that way, to follow it, to accommodate it, to accommodate reality. However unpleasant or wonderful it might seem, it will change, and we can flow with reality. So I hope that that's something that we can continue to help each other to do with this practice. Thank you.